Hello. So, if you're looking a little background on the relationship between Finland, Sweden, and Russia, well, this is background, but it certainly ain't the start of things. And this is also another attempt to record this. I did originally record this long patrol on Friday the 13th of May, and it's turned out terrible. So now I am with Dog, a fluffy research assistant, of course, has joined me. We are in the garden. It is a Saturday morning. It is a sunny Saturday in the UK. So that means, of course, people are doing DIY loudly, and from the sounds of occasional swearing and pain, badly. Um, Wear gloves. Don't use an axle grinder if you don't know what you're doing. That's the basic rules. But people will be people. Oh, humanity, the humanity. And so I'm in here. But I'm keeping the door open and the windows open because it's a hot, sunny day, and because I have a lovely laptop and I have a lovely screen, and they are lovely, but they are also not as good as a tower would be. But my tower, as you all know, if you've watched before, is currently out of action. I'm trying to buy parts to rebuild it, or I'm actually going to end up buying a new computer because buying a Dell is actually almost cheaper than getting the parts moment, thanks to people who are doing crypto mining, buying all the various graphics cards. Hopefully, you're not hearing the angle grinder. The angle grinder. I am, and well, that's life. But it's fun. Anyway, so Canada trip coming up. Me and Drac are off to Canada, which is always fun. I get into Canada on the 2nd of June. We do actually have a dinner on the Friday, but it's someone's invited to us to their house, which is wonderful. Then we have dinner with the Canadian fans on the 4th, which is being organised by Stafford and Wayne. If you want to track down their details, you'll find them on the Discord channel, which is a link to is down below. You will find we'll be these are sort of roughly our days of filming. We're booked in with these ships, so those are the days we should be there. They theoretically. I always say this is the start. This is the plan. The plan rarely survives first contact with the enemy, but we have a plan. We have a plan. We have an agreement. We have emails printed out. We will cross fingers, and things will go well. So we have the 5th of June, which is a spare day, where we're hoping to probably go to the Canadian Aviation Museum and a Blue Jays game. But basically, I am under orders to make sure Brack doesn't kill himself. And whilst I have the energy levels of a, how do I put this politely? A Jack in a Box souped up on liquid sugar. Can't think where the liquid sugar comes in. I recognise most people don't. Then Monday, it's hopefully the Sullivans and Little Brook. And then it's fly to Halifax, visit film Sackville, and go to the Canadian National Archives and Museum of the Atlantic. Probably the Museum of the Atlantic go better, because there are actually ships for us to go around there. And the Canadian National Archives, I'm looking forward to, but I do realise that of the group going, I am the only one who's a record hound. But we have nothing happening in the evenings in Halifax, so if anyone would like to meet up with us and recommend restaurants or places for us to go for 2 carnivores and 2 people who are with them who basically are going to be living as carnivores for those 2 years, despite one of them being an actual medical doctor, because, well, the exact expression was, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do, and when doing naval history, you do as the bearded naval historians do, which is carnivores. Well, the 2 who are going, anyway. And then it's back to Hamilton, film Odra, do various things wandering around in Hamilton. If anyone wants to meet up again, you're more than welcome to. You might end up bumping into my family. Drac is now no longer flying home on the 10th. He's actually flying home on the Sunday. So, yeah. This is us. This is what we're doing. Broadly speaking. And currently, when this goes out, this will still be live because the vote goes on till tomorrow. Patron question suggestions for May 2022, which are questions 1 to 14, and I think 22 have been adapted into it. And this is a lovely selection of questions, and I'm really proud of the patrons putting all this together. The fact that I get so many questions and they are so good is really quite cool. I haven't checked out the voting yet. Again, you can find a link to Patreon down below. It's open to all patrons to vote. You can vote for as many as you like. Please, not everyone vote for everyone. If every single one of them gets 89 votes, I am going to cry. And I know this is a British person saying this, and I live in a world post Boaty McBodie face, so I shouldn't be saying this. But seriously, if they all get 89 votes, I will cry. Because then I will have to do things for them. And I say 89 because that's the number of patrons I have. I'm 11 off 100. And I'm very proud of all of them. Mainly because, as an academic, and this is the... It's hard to put in words, and this is trouble for someone who's pretty much a wordsmith by profession. That's what historians and etc. are. How much and how different it feels to get the level of support you do when you're doing the work in YouTube. You are so used to being said no to people telling you that especially naval history, but military history in general, isn't worth studying anymore. There's nothing to learn, and it's never going to happen again, so why do we need to learn it? Or that you're a warmonger because you're researching it. You get so used to the putbacks and the pushbacks, and well, you're studying far too modern stuff. You should only bother ages sail. No one cares about modern naval history. The support that I get from all of you, just yeah, it means a lot. And this is one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to Canada, because I'm going to get to meet some of you, and I'm trying to start arranging events because it started going COVID, but I'm starting to try and arrange things, and I'm hoping as I go around archive tours, etc., when I start to visit archives, I'm going to try and arrange things where if people want to meet up, they can meet up. I know that I am nowhere near as popular as some of the other colleagues, including, and this is what I always love, when I talk to some of my colleagues, 7,000 subscribers on YouTube, they go, oh, that's amazing. And I go, no, it's really not. It's really good. I love it. I'm really proud of them. Thank you very much. But when your best friend has 350,000, so literally has 50 to 1 numerical superiority, and follows, you go, I am still very much an amateur at this, and I am doing my best to improve and learn and get better. But I realize I am nowhere near a master in this medium. And all praise to him, because Drac is frankly amazing, and if you haven't ever watched his channel, you are missing out. And I say this to someone who had dinner with him last night. It was great fun. Oh, right. We're talking about the Canada trip. So, theatre of operations for this. Well, Russia, supported by France and Denmark, Norway, because Sweden is the threat to Denmark, Norway, right up until they start thinking that Russia is going to conquer the whole of Sweden. It's amazing. We'll be your friend and support you in this. And then they go, hang on, if you they didn't think you would actually do that well. Oh sugar, oh sugar, oh sugar, oh sugar. The Russian steamroller is going to be right next to us. Oh sugar, we don't want that. It's kind of like how do I put this? Let's put it this way, even say modern Russia, countries are very keen and very pro-Russia when they are beating up their mutual enemy, or mutual potential opponent or opposition in between them, until they realise, hang on, if the Russians win, that means the Russians are going next to us. And the Russians have never not been a bit of an expansionist power. Never not an expansionist power. Sorry, everyone who doesn't agree with this one, but it's true. Russia's always had a realpolitik perspective when it comes to borders. That borders are things you currently subscribe to, but can always expand, never willingly contract. And then Sweden, supported by Britain. If that sounds interesting, well, we are of course talking about the period of Napoleonic Wars, so that tells you which side which is on. Yes, the Russians were on the side of Napoleon. It was after the Treaty of Still, and Alexander I was the romping, stomping emperor who was allied with his emperor buddy Napoleon, who he believed would always tell him the truth and was a wonderful, wonderful person. Yeah. Now, it's the Fifth Coalition is coming up. The Anglo-Russian War of 1807 to 1812 is ranging, and of course, there's been the Second Battle of Copenhagen. So we must consider the fact that the Danish Navy no longer exists as a functional force. They had enough trouble after Copenhagen Round One. Copenhagen Round Two was really not fair. But in good news, Britain have given Copenhagen something which I'm sure they don't realize. Then their name is now more valuable than any other city in the world. After all, you do not New York someone, you do not London someone, you do not Paris someone, but you can Copenhagen them. So it's a city name, which is also something you can do to people. It's it's something for history. We have given them something which is brilliant for history. I'm sure many of the Danish don't agree with it, and possibly, judging by some of the comments I've had in the past that when I've done the videos on Copenhagen, some of them believe the British were absolutely evil to do it. And when I explained to them that, frankly, the British don't accept people's words for, no, our navy will under no circumstances go and assist the Napoleon who is conquering us. The British don't really take the assurances as anything worth it. In fact, let's be honest, why were the French so surprised at Mers al-Kabir? The British have literally done this to other nations. Well, to Denmark twice, but to other nations as well. To Denmark, they don't trust other navies not to join their opponents when they switch sides. Or they might be neutral powers who might be conquest. They take them out. The British have a history of doing it. And here are the strategic authorities for this particular war. We have Alexander I of Russia, who goes for a walk by a river with a fellow autocrat and is absolutely sure that they are each other's bosom buddies, despite having theoretically completely opposite political viewpoints. Yeah, I am describing Alexander I and Napoleon, not Stalin and Hitler. Or Putin and always have to remember autocrats don't have friends. They have people they consider useful. Gustav IV of Sweden has been on the throne since 1792, so the buck stops with him. Likes to surround himself with yes men, and frankly makes the most circular decisions known to mankind. Honestly, when I'm reading about Gustav IV of Sweden, I think somehow he must be related to the government of Norway in 1939. Honestly, I'm not sure how, but they follow the same circular thinking. We are being threatened by another nation, so we must not arm ourselves or prepare in any way for fear of upsetting that nation, in case lest they attack us before we're ready. But we are not making any preparations to be ready for fear of upsetting them. It gets better when you we realize that he believes that Napoleon is the Antichrist. So here is your strategic problem. Your strategic authority believes that you are literally fighting a demigod running the other side. Okay? A demigod. Now, this is a small problem. There are problems in life when you're a strategic authority and you estimate your opponent is weaker or stupider than you, if you presume your opponent's dumb. Recent comments, this is recorded in May 2022, by a certain US Navy officer suggesting that the Chinese ships aren't as good as the American ships, so they don't need to worry about them having superiority of numbers because they are not as well built. That's a lovely thing to. I'm sure everyone's going to worry about the quality build of the ships and etc. when missiles are raining down on you, because numbers really do tend to matter at a certain point. You still have to shoot down the missiles. But leaving that to one side, presuming your opponent is dumber than you isn't a good idea, because that gives you a full sense of superiority, which means you don't prepare properly, your people don't prepare properly, and then when war happens, you collapse. And they collapse. Because they only have to be slightly better than you estimate them to be, and they win. So this is the trouble. Presuming your enemy is dumb is bad. Presuming your enemy is a demigod is just as bad, because under one scenario, why do you prepare because there's nothing worth preparing for, and the other one, there's no point preparing because they are going to outmaneuver you because they literally have the power of, in the case of the Antichrist, presumably hell on earth. Now, if they have that much power, there is no chance of beating them. Not for a merely mortal army. Not unless you can get an archangel. Probably Archangel's better than, let's be honest, Jesus, because Jesus is a very nice person who apparently is a bit of a doesn't like fighting, whereas the Antichrist does like fighting. So Jesus can come and deal with the morale side and the bit behind the lines, but we'll take a archangel, preferably one of the ones who carry swords, to actually do the commanding of the troops. But let's not get in. So, considering these are the strategic authorities, let's consider the strategic concept of operations. We have Sweden. Defense of Finland is based around incomplete or badly maintained forts. This includes Sveaborg, which is basically described as the Gibraltar or the Gibraltar of the North and all these things. Let's put it this way: Gibraltar is actually easier to defend because it's one contiguous island. Has a garrison of roughly 7,500 troops, and the enemy can only really attack from one spectrum. And also, there's the fact is the British were maintaining the defences. They didn't build them and then go, you know what, we're going to leave those. But let's also consider where Gibraltar's defences are built. Gibraltar is in the Mediterranean, a warm but mildish climate. Yes, there's salt water around, but let's be honest, it's fairly stable as climates go. Sveaborg is built in the high north, where there is much ice, and occasionally the Baltic, as it does this year, ices over completely, and so you can't get naval support, so therefore you are dependent upon the forts to defend the fleet which is stuck in the ice inside your harbour, with the fleet, by the way, which is your linchpin of victory under your own strategic plan. Actually build the fortifications, replace the artillery. Think about how artillery changes between 1791 and 1808 and 1809. Think about how the wooden carriages will wear out and destroy themselves in this time. Think about all the things that happen. Do you leave your critical fortification without it? If you're not going to invest in anything, you invest in Spurborg. Okay? But they didn't. It's under garrisoned, underarmed, and underprepared. And they also didn't have, even though they'd actually built some of the infrastructure themselves on the new roads, they had no maps of the new roads. They had no idea of the infrastructure there. You're building new roads which are going to make it easier for your enemy to attack. and you have no maps of it. Then we have the result, which can be summed up as passively defend and hold. The plan is passively defend and hold on to the fortifications in the southern coast of Finland, so that when it warms up, the navy can basically bring an army into the south, and the maneuver army you keep in Finland can come down from the north, where it's gone to go and position itself. And yeah, modus operandi will be to avoid major decisive battles and fight a war maneuver where you push the Russian steamroller back through them not being able to support or sustain themselves logistically. Fairly decent concept of operations. Works out quite well, apparently, if you can actually implement it. Need to make sure those fortifications are actually built up and will actually hold. And have the supplies, garrisons, trained personnel, weapons are actually built. Don't have huge holes in their walls. All those things. Russia. Yeah. Let's see. They threatened war in September 1807. Actually declared war in April 1808, but invaded in February 1808. So invaded before they declared war. Um. mm, I have to say, what would I have done if I'd been the Finnish commanding officer? Probably withdrawn everything to Sveaborg and put everything into defending Sveaborg. If I'd withdrawn all my forces straight to there, I could have probably rigged up some temporary land defences, sorted out, brought in all supplies, brought everything back to Sveaborg, all the supply people from Helsinki, everything to there, and just waited them out. Until I could get supplies in, I don't think I'd have done the plans I did, but we'll leave that to one side. Um, Attack in winter when the frozen waters negated the Swedish naval advantage. Yes, the Swedish navy was far stronger and far more capable than the Russian navy. Phase one: advance and isolate fortresses. That works. And you must remember the Russians had better maps. They were actually up to date and accurate. And thanks to some various interesting defectors, they also had a lot more information about the people in Finland. And these two part of the cut off the retreat of the main body of the Swedish army and then annihilate it. Yeah, it works. Before we get into the whole Finnish people involved in this war, you have to remember that they have been fought over several times, and by this point, they feel like they've been abandoned for 20 years of watching the forts that were supposed to be built to protect them and make partners with them collapse around them. They don't feel like Sweden really wants them. And if we consider during the actual war, Gustav IV will keep the crack troops of Sweden and the best soldiers back in Sweden because he wants to go on offensive operations against the Norwegians and the Danes, because that will get him victory, and he doesn't need to worry about Finland. It will sort itself out. He'll win. It's also important to note that the Finnish guerrillas are very similar in their effectiveness as the Spanish partisans, and there are potentials here. There is the British turn up with a 10,000 man expeditionary force. It's often the general turns up with 14,000 troops. He doesn't turn up with 14,000. It's 10,000 roughly. But the thing is, the Swedish, and this is not including the naval personnel in it, which is sensible because if you consider what happens whenever the Baltic freezes, the navy becomes pretty much part of the army. Yeah, you can understand the Swedish command system, but the British command system is different from that. Now, have a look at this map. This is how it starts. At 5 a.m. in the morning, the Russians cross the border. And I have nicked this map and these other maps straight from the lovely thing known as Wikipedia. But you can see the Åland Islands, you can see Gotland, you can see all those critical spaces. Those have to be maintained. In fact, in the nicest way, if I was Sweden, I would have had garrisons on both of those to protect Stockholm. And I would have also made sure that there was a direct route running, no matter what time, to Sverborg. If it was iced over, I would have had a Pony Express running. If it was open water, I'd have had ships constantly going around. I'd have made sure I had constant information on my critical port, because the Sverborg is critical for protecting the Allied islands and is critical for keeping the Russian fleet where it is. But this is Sweden as it begins the operations. And again, please note, the Swedish commander is not there. He has only just been dispatched with incomplete and incoherent command structures. So he doesn't turn up till after the war's begun. Mainly because they didn't know the war was going to begin. And because Gustav has been holding off sending people and sending reinforcements because A, he's worried about his potential plans to invade Denmark and Norway, and B, he's worried about, upsetting Alexander I, who has literally been threatening him with war since September. I think the first thing I'd have done the moment I received those instructions, or those things from Alexander I, would have been mobilize and send reinforcements out to all of my the major forts in Finland. Even if it's just a few hundred troops. I'd have included engineers and supplies to start fixing them, because even in 5 months of winter, you could do a lot of work. You could get a lot of things fixed, especially if you sent over a load of wood supplies and got them to fix undercarriages and things for guns. Even if the existing guns are not as great as they could be, as long as they have good undercarriages, they can be of use. They might not have the range or the reliability to take on the Russian artillery they're bringing with them, but they could be of use. And it would show commitment. This is the thing. Whenever I read the discussions, I sit there and think, look, if the large numbers of Finnish people feel that they're going to be abandoned to the Russians anyway, why fight the Russians? Why? You're just going to make things worse for you. You're going to be lost because Sweden's not coming back for you. And this is some of the battles we're going to be looking at today. But this is the chronology of the war. And it's not a short or quick war, but it's not a massively long one either. There are some interesting battles in there. Now, the British support arrives in May 1808, and it hangs around for a little while, but there's a problem. Moore arrives, and he arrives at Gothenburg on the 17th of May. Not allowed to land his troops, okay, which seems a bit strange. Normally, you're allowed to disembark your troops and let them rest. Okay, fine. He summoned to Stockholm to confer with Gustavus. Whom he found bent on schemes of conquest. This is according to Marjorie Bloy, who's a pretty good historical source. Please go look at history.home.co.uk. Unfortunately, Marjorie is no longer with us, but her website I have been sending students to for many, many years. Many times before. I've known about it for a fair number of years, and she worked really hard on it and was a really good historian of the period. The king proposed that the British with some Swedish troops should cede to Zealand, and afterwards that the British should go to Finland to fight the Russians. Well, he ends up having to escape dressed as a peasant and takes his troops home. Leaves a fleet of warships there. Remember, the British turned up not just with soldiers, but with warships. Which is an advantage. It really is an advantage if the British turn up British warships. Now, what could they have done? Well, there are two options for that force. Sorry, I've just dropped a small rubber thing on the floor and I'm going to pick it up before the fluff eats it. Got it. There are two options for such a force. It could go to Finland to act as reinforcement to the troops of the mobile army there, which is about 5,500 strong. And if Gustavus had combined an extra 5,000 troops or so there and sent them off with them, that would be an army of 20,000 in the field. Now, considering the Russian invasion force is roughly 24,000 troops, and they're going to need to garrison. If there's suddenly a mobile army of 20,000, then they have to concentrate, and they can't do their siege operations. And they have to focus on where that army is. Another option, land the troops in Sweden, have them be part of the defence force sitting in Sweden, act as deterrent and tripwire to anyone else trying to invade Sweden, and then send off the Swedish troops to go and attack, go and fight in Finland. That's an option. Or use them as a reinforcement garrison to stick on the Åland Islands or anything. I'd have said getting involved in Finland would have been the sensible thing, because as we can see from what happens in Portugal and the Iberian Peninsula campaign and the Peninsula War, if you'd got the British involved, the British would have been involved for quite a while. And this is, remember, the force which ends up going and fighting in the forming the open nucleus of the Peninsula War. So they're not bad troops. The British would have sustained too such forces. They'd have been quite happy to, because they would have drained Napoleon of his allies, or they'd forced him to get French troops, which Alexander would not have wanted. Now, Sveaborg is this critical place, and look at this lovely island structure. It's critical to as the base of the navy. It's critical as the base of anything. And yes, one of the interesting things about this is that the ships and everything ends up getting handed over to the Russians. They do. It falls on the 3rd of May. It falls because it's running out of supplies. It falls because they've heard no word of support from the king. They've got no relief force. Yes, they're frozen in. Yes, the messages sent to the king got slowed up by the Russians. And yes, they have all sorts of whispers going to the commander's ears about what is going to happen. And yes, he has thousands of civilians and poorly trained troops. There is debates as to whether or not half his troops do not have the supplies they need. Now, there is a debate about how much stores and the quality of the stores and the munitions the Russians received when they surrendered. And there is a debate about the defenses were certainly strong enough to resist a taking by surprise, so they were besieged. But the critical thing for Sweden was that fleet. And the critical thing for that fleet was defending it when it was iced in, and that was that was Sveaborg. Sveaborg should have been under repair. It should have been looked after and maintained. But also, and I say this politely, you should not have had a commanding officer who was anything less than 100% your most trusted officer. Now, this is an officer who had been going for commander-in-chief of the Swedish Navy. And he ended up having an argument with Gustav over the funding, as I understand it, and the support of the armed forces. and the quality of the officer corps and the maintaining that quality in terms of putting in officers who were good at their jobs. And instead of getting commander of the commander of the navy, he'd been sent off to command the fortress and that particular squadron. So, in other words, you're using your most critical position posting for a senior officer who you're disagreeing with. Then there's Gotland, which is a very interesting occupation scenario. Basically, the Russians turn up, they find no troops. They take Gotland. The local governor tries to raise a levy, but when he starts to takes on the Russians, he realizes very quickly the levy, which have literally most of them have fowling pieces, not even weapons of war, and yeah, he surrenders. The Russians leave the Swedish personnel in charge. They basically just change the governor to this particular admiral, and then another Swedish admiral turns up with the fleet and kicks them out. Gotland secured. The question is, why didn't Gotland have a garrison on it in the first place? There are so many problems in Sweden, in this empire. For starters, in a territory which is as riven by ice and snow as it is, you need strong local defense because it's going to take a while to get supplies. So you should have reserves. You should be investing in them. If you're going to depend on fortifications, you need to invest in those fortifications. And if you're going to use your fleet as your maneuver assets in an internal war, in internal axis of the war, because if you consider it basically under the plans, Sweden is supposed to use this water as its internal space. There is not a lot of infrastructure around, so the Swedish fleet is basically their maneuver force. It's another version of what's going to happen in the American Civil War, in that where you have the railways and you have the rivers, and then you have an external communication line, which is the sea, which is used to move large amounts of goods. Well, in this case, the sea, that space, is the internal communication space. And when it's iced over, that's when you have the ability to march troops over it. And the Russians do, as do the Swedes. But the trouble is, Sverborg and the other places are critical access points which they need to control. They're not just points on a map of going, we control this, therefore we control access to this area, that area. No, they are the bastions you're supposed to be reinforcing through. When I looked at the garrison of Sverborg, I was sort of going, hang on, what? Huh? If you consider Gibraltar again, it has 7,500 troops and a tiny one. Basically, it's one island, one peninsula in some regards, and it's got a narrow front facing it, and it's got a huge fortification, and it's this stuff built inside into the mountain, into the rock, and all this stuff. It is a very complicated, very well armed, and very well defended and stored fortification. Sverberg is no Gibraltar. It really isn't. If, as I said, if I'd been the Swedish commander, I'd have A, withdrawn to Sverborg and secured it with my maneuver army and reinforced it. But yeah, then I'd have created this sort of a best case scenario is you do that, and then with another commander on there, a general there as well, a field marshal there as well as an admiral, two bonds able to talk to each other. Hopefully, neither of them consider surrendering, and they've got enough troops and supplies. Then have the British turn up and have more troops come from home, and you could have a massive army sitting in there while the Russians are outside starving at the end of the logistics line. Yeah, that's kind of what you do. At various points, the Swedes do fight back. And Lemo is a good example, which I didn't discuss there, but there's a great maneuver from the sea and extraction to the sea point going on. Now, this is something which really illustrates through the campaign. It's something of maneuver, it's something of seaborne operations. It's a great war for littoral operations and understanding the realistic potential and opportunities of littoral warfare in this area of the world. Because there are peculiarities to operating in the Baltic which need to be understood if you're considering it, especially with Finland and Sweden hopefully joining NATO now. That is something which is going to need to be studied in detail and in depth. Battle of Ravs. It's one of those battles where the Swedes are win the Russian attack on the Swedes is defeated. The Swedish counterattack to the attack succeeds and then has to turn back, and then it's sort of a counterattack and another counterattack. It's basically the Russians win because of numbers and because the Swedes do not have the resources. And again, this is one of those things. If you'd had the British there with their army backing up the Swedish maneuver army, there would have been a completely different scenario, and they could have had it. Let's be honest, they could have had it by the Battle of Lemo quite easily. When you consider they get to Gotland and it's this occupation goes on in for me. Imagine if the fleet sent to Gotland, which has 2,000 troops with it, imagine if they'd been joined by the British. They'd have had 12,000. And then they could have gone on from Gotland and reinforced the army and manoeuvre in Finland. Oh, again, the Helsinki village landing is a great example of please don't let the king anywhere near it. King Gustav turns up, and he turns up on the final day, and basically it's going well, and then Russians get reinforcements, which is usually what happens. The Swedish turn up, have initially success, and then Russians turn up with overwhelming numbers. What if you go back to their original doctrine, fight a maneuver war, don't fight decisive battles? That was very sensible for them. Russians turn up, they have overwhelming numbers, that's a decisive battle, ouch, we have to withdraw. Usually, as they did at Battle of Lemnos, they can withdraw under the cover of gunboats and ships providing fire support. However, the king had turned up in his yacht and ordered all the gunboats to Kalioto to do other operations. So there are only defenseless troop ships left, as the Swedes were loading on board. Great. Always good to have a king turn up to be fun. Now, this is really what ends the war. The Aland offensive. Yes, the Russians are going round at the top, and yes, there's all sorts of maneuvers going on, and there are all sorts of fights in Sweden. But once you've lost Sverborg, you move along the coast. You can then cross from Finland to the Aland Islands, and from the Aland Islands to 70 kilometers north of Stockholm, over the ice in Baltic. That ain't good. And this leads to negotiations and discussions and eventually the end of the war on very favourable terms. But there are a few more battles after this. There's the Battle of Rattan, where again, Swedes land, they're fighting, then they have to do a draw behind gunboats. And the gunboats do well and basically beat up the Russians. And the Battle of Patea, where Oh, good lord, I can't believe I'm doing this again. So there is a famous movie scene where a Jedi Knight shouts at a Sith, or a fallen Jedi, I think more accurate description at this point. The Jedi is Obi-Wan Kenobi. The fallen Jedi, Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan Kenobi shouts the immortal line, "It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!" And Anakin tries to do that flip over the thing. When, let's be honest, a flip off to one side, then walking up the hill would probably be more sensible. There are many maneuvers he could have done which would have been far more sensible. We'll leave that to one side. Going for the showy, starry, wonderful thingy doesn't really work. Be pragmatic. Here is the Battle of Pattaya. Now, the Battle of Pattaya is a good example of idiots in charge. I'm sorry, I always kind of try and come up with a nicer way of putting it, but it's an idiot. So, the Swedish Naval Squadron is wandering up and down, trying to capture Russian vessels and that are sailing northwards, and general sea control stuff. They're built around a frigate and 6 cannon sloops. They come across a force of a battalion of infantry, some Cossacks, under the command of General Nikolai Kamensky. Good force. Upon seeing the Swedes, the Russians decide to ride quickly on their horses to give the spread news of the Southern Rifle, but they're killed by fire from one of the Swedish sloops. Cannon fire. The Swedes spot a bridge they're supposed to destroy. They decide it's clearly visible from the water, and it's determined that it can be easily destroyed by cannon from the sloops. However, the commanding officer, Major Hauswolf, decides it's more appropriate, probably more certain, or I don't know what, to destroy the bridge personally. And resolves to row on a launch in the direction of the bridge. He is, surprise, surprise, shot by Russian pickets and either badly injured or killed, depends on the account you read. Command then falls to Georg Samuel von Gegerfeldt, who decides to take the flotilla of ships into the narrow strait towards the bridge. When they're surrounded on both sides by Russian infantrymen, who now have, of course, the high ground. Mm-hmm. They therefore, at this point, decide that a landing would not likely be possible given the strong position of Russian forces, but decide they're still determined to try it. However, at this point, thankfully, they spot a Russian transport vessels coming from the south and intent on resupplying Russian land forces, so they decide to go out to attack them. And then they realise they're escorted, so they go away. The only thing that stopped that situation being, and then it got worse through their own stupid decisions, is the Russians. The whole thing is, and then it got worse. We would probably not remember the Battle of Pattaya if they'd just blown up the bridge with cannon fire. No one would still be talking about it. No one would remember it. It would be just one of those small, random operations. It wouldn't even be a battle. It would be a bombardment. It would be it happened. But no. No. Just no. So the treaty ends up being quite a nice one for Finland to an extent. It's not good for Finland in that eventually it doesn't have any benefits in it vis-a-vis Russification, and eventually the Russians do get around to trying Russification about 100 years later, just before World War One. Always fun. The Russians like to Russify places when they conquer them. But it does set up the Grand Duchy of Finland, and they get pretty much most of all modern Finland, and even some territories from Russia are given there to make the Grand Duchy stronger. Sweden does a lot of reforms afterwards, and the Treaty of Freedom is pretty important. And then Russia decides to do some mitigating and mediation between Finland and France, so the Treaty of Paris will be agreed, and Sweden is forced into the continental system. Now, you might have noticed there's a few changes here, but there is a change going on because, well, Gustav IV loses his throne and is replaced by Charles XIII, his uncle, and then eventually by Bernadotte, who is, of course, becomes Marshal Bernadotte, who becomes the Crown Prince of Sweden, and then later on the king, and is pretty good at it. Largely chosen because no one wanted Gustav's son to get the position, because they worried that Gustav's son, if he eventually became king, would go after getting revenge on all of them. But honestly, it's a surprise Gustav hadn't already been assassinated by his own son. That is quite something which happens to that line. Anyway, leaving that to one side, the Russians come out of this and think, you know what, those S's of Austerlitz and all the others, they were wrong. We have a wonderful army. Look, we've just won in Finland. And at which point they end up eventually having a nasty fight with Napoleon, which ends roughly at Borodino, which the only reason the Russians claim they win is that Napoleon refused to order the guard, his troops, personal troops, to follow up. But let's be honest, it's a Russian win because they have more troops to put into the cement mixer because they're fighting in their own territory. Not a Russian win because they won the actual battlefield. And it's a Russian win despite of Alexander, not because of him. Seriously, Alexander's usually such a reliably good name. What happened to this one? Oh yes, he's a Russian Tsar. Right. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you found it useful. Fluffy Research Assistant has joined me. And thank you very much again for all your support. I hope you enjoy what's coming up this week. The long patrol of the cruisers is on the Galaxy class, which is going to be fun because one of the interesting conversations I had with Thrak was he's working on a project himself towards to do with Federation of Star Trek, and I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, they're cruisers," and he's going, "Well, you know," so that's going to be fun. We'll be debating that for most of the Canada trip probably, and yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for your support. Thank you for all the super chats. Thank you for all the super thanks. Thank you for all the patrons. Thank you for all the subscribers. Thank you for everyone who just watches the channel. Thank you for everyone who donates on PayPal and does all that stuff. It's very kind of you, and nothing would be done without you. Literally, the Canada trip is entirely paid for by you. There's a small grant coming, but everything else has pretty much come from all of you and a bit of my work. And all the stuff I'm using comes from you. So thank you. Without you, you wouldn't be making. You wouldn't. This history stuff wouldn't be possible. So thank you very much. Thank you, and take care. Fluff, what are you doing?